All right, in this video I'm going to show you how to kind of build up layers starting from the back and then moving forward, starting with really light layers and then adding on top of that really saturated layers. So we're going to do two different shapes. One will be a sphere and then one will be kind of like a cube. So I'm going to move this out of the way just so I can draw them real quick. Really lightly, I'm going to draw a nice circle here, which we will turn into a sphere, and then a cube. To start off, I would add a couple drops of water to your paint. I find that with these washable watercolors, this helps the colors get really vibrant. And after adding a couple drops of water, I always would add just water to all your colors if you know you're going to use most of them, just so you don't have to wait again later. They'll all have already been like soaking in some water. So once you add a couple drops of water, you're just going to wait. And once you've waited about a minute or two or so, you can kind of go ahead and check your paints. And what I like to do is take that water and swirl it around until it becomes a nice thick mixture of paint. It's kind of cloudy, it's not translucent or see-through at all. And then you've got your thick, kind of saturated, strong color. So right now I'm swirling around in the violet. First, I want to start with a nice light base layer. So I'm going to take some of my purple here, scoop that into this dish on the side, and just like we were going to make a tint with watercolor, I'm going to add a bunch of water, because this is kind of like my first base layer. And with the sphere, we're going to work while it's all still kind of wet, and this is if you need to do any sort of blending from dark to light. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tint that I just made by adding a bunch of water, picking up more as I need, and carefully filling in my circle. And while it's still wet, I'm going to go ahead and swirl around in my nice saturated paint, which is nice and strong color. I'm going to go ahead and paint on this shadow side of my sphere. I'm starting to make it look a little more three-dimensional. I'm going to make kind of like a little C shape here, and then almost like a little crescent moon on the side here. Now, if you notice that the more you paint a little further and further to the right, that it's not really getting lighter, you can just take your paintbrush, wipe it on paper towel, and then you can use your paintbrush to kind of drag that color over a little bit. If you need to wet your brush without any color on it, you can do that as well. It helps you kind of just move the color around without extra color being on your brush. So right now I've kind of got that a lighter value, a sort of darker value, and if I really wanted to, I could swirl around my purple, paint even more, and add some stronger purples all the way around the edge. If I needed shadows, I would add black, but I won't worry about that right now. So you can see that I've added yet another layer of that saturated purple, and it's going to continue to add that strong saturated color on the side. So I'm going to go ahead and dry off my brush here, rinse it off. I'm going to go ahead and add a highlight in to my sphere. So I don't want a ton of water, so I'm going to just tap my brush gently on my paper towel, and I'm going to swirl it around on one spot where I'm going to make a highlight. Put my brush down. Take my paper towel and press on that spot and lift. So now I've got a very bright highlight. Right now I have a really harsh, crisp line around that highlight. If I want to soften it, I just have to take my brush that's just wet with water, not paint, kind of rub it around the outside to soften up that highlight. You can keep your highlight really bright and crisp if you want to. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the cube. I'm going to try it with a different color here. We'll go with my blue. The rest of my palette is quite messy, as you can see, so I'm going to try and squeeze this in right down here. Hopefully that's enough room to do it. So I'm swirling this paint around, and remember I already put water in here. It's been sitting in there for a little while, so it should be nice and saturated. So after I've swirled all that paint together, and it's no longer transparent water on top of paint, I'm going to swipe off the extra, because I don't need a lot, I'm making a tint, put my blue here, And I'm adding drops of water, just like I'm gonna make my tint, the really light value. And I'm going ahead and paint my entire cube. All right, so now I'm gonna let all of this dry. Unlike this one where we wanted kind of like that blend to happen, this one I want those edges to be really clean and I don't want any bleeding to happen. So I'm gonna wait for this entire layer to dry. All right, so I'm gonna go in and do the darker side of my cube. So I'm gonna swirl around right in the paint well here. And we want a nice saturated color, so I'm gonna swirl for a little while, even though I've already mixed together my paint. And then I'm going to go right on top of the paint that I had previously. And you can see because I added water to it earlier and because I swirled my paintbrush around in that paint for a while, the colors have mixed together to create a really saturated or strong color. It's not super see-through. It's nice and opaque, which is the opposite of translucent or see-through. And I also waited for the layer below to dry completely so that my edges did not bleed. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lift off or erase some of that paint. So I need a clean brush just with some water here. So I'm going to move my paints out of the way. I'm going to carefully put water on the space that I want to remove the paint from. And I'm going to take my paper towel, lay it on top of there, and erase that. If I need to lift it off some more, I can always go back in with some more water, be a little more precise there, and then do the same thing again. So now I've got my shaded cube and my shaded sphere. This one is kind of a soft gradient, so you work while it's wet. And this one is where you're kind of keeping those hard edges or those defined edges, and you have to wait until each layer dries. Both of them are helpful techniques, but what you need to remember is that you always want to work from light to dark, and you want to work from the background forward. For example, if I was going to paint a room, we'll just make the walls blue, or we'll make the walls purple, we'll say. If I wanted to paint the bed, I wouldn't paint the bed and then paint the whole room behind it, because then I would have to worry about all those edges. What I would do instead is paint the whole wall behind it, wait for all of that to dry, and then I would add my layer on top. Yeah, so that's a lot easier because you can work with layers rather than worrying about painting around all the tiny little edges. Okay, so work back to front, not front to back. All right, so hopefully this helped you with your layering skills with watercolor. Remember, work back to front and start with your lighter values and then layer on top your darker values. And remember, you can always erase if you would like a bright highlight.